Hello, Devex individual professional members from around the world, and welcome to Devex's first ever entry-level careers webinar. My name is Lauren Brander, and I'll be moderating this event. President Raj Kumar will be presenting in just a few minutes, but before I hand this off to him, I'd like to do some introductions and go over some logistics for this event. Today we're talking about entry-level careers, which is a topic I actually am pretty familiar with since I just graduated with my MPP from Johns Hopkins in May. I know that it can be really difficult to navigate, especially if you're a foreign national working outside of your home country. For example, I'm Canadian, so I know there are a lot of things you have to deal with when you work abroad or for an international NGO or firm. That's why I think it's so important to stay on top of your job search and to have a strategy to deal with it, which is what Raj is going to talk about today. Raj started Devex 10 years ago when he was at Harvard's Kennedy School of Government in 2000. In the last 10 years, the company has grown to over 100 staff in DC, Manila, Tokyo, Barcelona, and London, and serves 500,000 members of the international development community, as well as over 300 executive member organizations. So you know you're both in good company and that there's a lot of competition for every position. Raj is known in the international development community for Devex, as well as a writer, guest analyst in the media, and political strategist for national and international campaigns. He is a life member of the Council of Foreign Relations, and Raj's work with Devex, which hosts the largest international development career board in the world and serves both job seekers and recruiters, gives him a unique perspective on the challenges facing entry-level job seekers. So this is a great opportunity to get advice on starting your career from someone who has a really in-depth knowledge of how hiring and employment work in the development industry specifically. I know he's very excited to speak to you and hear your questions, but first I need to go over how this event will unfold. So here's how things are going to work for this first entry-level careers webinar. You'll be able to enter questions through the chat function of NetViewer at any time. I'll be keeping track of those, and only Raj and I will be able to see them. Raj has a short presentation, after which we'll be doing a question and answer period of about 15 to 20 minutes, depending on how our time's doing. You'll be able to see Raj's PowerPoint on your screen, and just so you know, there are several viewing options with NetViewer, so you may want to play around with those to see what works best for you. You can click on the NetViewer logo with an arrow next to it on the top of your screen to change the settings. You can submit questions throughout the entire session, including during the Q&A period, so please don't hesitate to do that, again, using the chat function you see on your screen. If you have any technical issues, please do contact the technical support team using the contact information in the email we sent you, because I won't be able to do anything about technical issues during the presentation. With all of that out of the way, please join me in welcoming Raj Kumar, President of Devex, who will take over and begin his presentation now.
Hello, everyone. This is Raj Kumar. I want to thank you all for joining us. I know there are people joining from all over the world. I see some messages from people coming in from Australia at 4 o'clock in the morning, so thank you for being up and for your attention and your interest in this topic. I think it's an exciting topic. We're here today to talk about how to break into the development field and the entry-level positions, and I think we've got people for whom this is their first job coming out of college, and others who have some real experience or are transitioning into this field. I think it's an exciting time to be doing it, and so we're going to go through some of the tips that we've acquired over the last several years working with people like yourselves who are trying to break into this field, and we're going to discuss some of the strategies you might use as Lauren described. So to get started, I'm going to put up a PowerPoint presentation. And let me just emphasize, as Lauren did, if you have questions during the course of this, you're welcome to send them through the chat. And if they address what I'm talking about and I have the time, I'll try to address them right away. Okay. At this point, you should all be seeing a PowerPoint presentation called Starting Your Career in International Development. And the first topic I want to address is really understanding the way the international aid and development industry works as an industry. And so I think the most important first step to take as you're trying to break in is to follow the money, which means understand that if you're looking for a job, where is the funding coming from for all these positions out there that you might be applying for? because depending on where the money is coming from, the types of positions may be different, the requirements and the strategies for getting them may be different. So the main areas that money for development and aid originate from are multilateral aid agencies, bilateral aid agencies, and then private foundations and NGOs. And why those matter, in terms of multilateral aid agencies, for the most part, and these are the big agencies like the World Bank and the Asian Development Bank, for the most part, they are funding projects in developing countries, and the governments of those countries are receiving loans from them, and they then go on to hire contractors to do the work. That's the vast majority of the money coming out of the World Bank and the other regional development banks. And that means a lot of the hiring that ends up taking place through those institutions happens on the ground in the developing world. So for those of you who are from developing countries, there are a lot of opportunities to work for domestic consulting companies or domestic engineering companies that may receive funding through the World Bank or through the Asian Development Bank. There's also a lot of opportunities to work for those institutions. And those institutions hire from all over the world. Citizenship is less of a bar. They do require that you come from one of the member countries of those large institutions, but many countries around the world are members, so it creates a lot of opportunity, I think. The kinds of positions that it creates, that these multilateral aid agencies create, are a little bit different from some of the other donor agencies and the other organizations funded from other sources. If you look at bilateral aid agencies like AusAid in Australia or DFID in the UK or USAID in the US, for the most part, they are funding NGOs and contracting companies in their own country. So USAID is mostly funding American companies, and DFID is mostly funding British companies. Now that's varying over time. We'll get into that in a moment, but that is still typically the case. So a lot of the hiring that's done ends up happening in the home country of those aid agencies. So if you come to Washington, D.C., you'll find a range of consulting companies and nonprofit organizations that are headquartered around the Washington, D.C. area and that are funded largely through the USAID. And so most of those positions here in Washington, D.C. end up going for Americans. And I think the same can be said for positions in Ottawa. Positions in Ottawa that are funded by CETA, and for positions in London that are funded by DFID, etc. So I think where you're from becomes an important factor as you determine your job search, as you begin your job search. Where you're from becomes an important factor because those bilateral aid agencies are generating a lot of jobs in their home countries, many of them entry level, many of them of interest to you, but there are going to be citizenship and work authorization requirements. Now, when you look at the jobs that are on the Devex job board, many of them are project positions, which are really consulting jobs generated through these bilateral aid agencies. So what happens is DFID funds a contracting company, and that contracting company wins a project to work in a particular developing country. And they then need to hire consultants as part of a project team. Those positions are in the developing world, they're in the field where I know a lot of you want to go. And in addition to that, they require technical skills. So we'll get into that in a little bit later, but those are typically technical positions. So from the bilateral aid agencies, there's a whole ecosystem of jobs that are created in the home country of those agencies and then where the projects are taking place on the ground. And then finally, you have private foundations and NGOs. And there are a lot of them in the rich world, but they're proliferating around the developing world too. Many of them are not funded by aid agencies or by the World Bank. They get their money domestically from individuals or from corporations, so they often don't have the same kinds of citizenship requirements. But because they are typically smaller, particularly the ones in the developing world, you're usually getting a local salary associated with it, and usually the positions are meant for locals from that country. But there's a whole range of activity in social enterprise, nonprofit enterprises that are happening, and there's a huge proliferation of these kinds of organizations. It's creating a lot of opportunities for those of you looking for an entry-level position. Okay. I just also want to talk a little bit about what are the hot sectors. For those of you who are starting out, you might have an opportunity to determine where you want to go in the development field. Obviously, the most important thing is where do you have skills and where do you have passion. If you're really interested in a particular topic, you should pursue that. But I thought it might be useful for you to think through what are some of the areas that are getting a lot of funding, because that's where a lot of the positions are based. Right now, global health is one of those. It's getting a large percentage of the development aid financing that's out there in the world. And it's hard to find people with the right experience. So if you have global health experience or you have an interest in that field, it's something to consider. Climate change is kind of a broad topic. It includes a lot of various positions, including regulatory change. So there's a lot of opportunities for lawyers. There's environmentalist positions that are open. There are biodiversity positions that are open. There's a whole range of jobs related to climate change, but it's a burgeoning area. And over the next 10 or 20 years, there are likely to be many more positions. So for those of you who are planning where to develop your career, that may be an area to consider. Agriculture is another that's getting a lot more attention, and infrastructure. Both of these were fields that were really popular in the 70s and 80s and then kind of tapered off in the 90s, but now they're becoming more popular again. There's a lot more funding for them. And then finally, I just want to talk a little bit about some of the trends in financing. I said follow the money. So what are some of the trends that you could look to determine where this industry is going as you develop your career? Untied aid. So many development agencies are untying their aid, which means that companies and NGOs from anywhere in the world can bid on them. Now, this has been talked about for a long time. It's still slow in coming, but it's happening. So there are agencies like DFID in the UK that have untied their aid, and some percentage, maybe 20%, perhaps 30% of their contracts are now going to non-British firms and NGOs. And so that creates more opportunities for those of you who in the past may have been restricted due to citizenship requirements. Another issue is globalization. So there used to be NGOs or companies that were really American or Canadian or British or French. Now a lot of these organizations have become global. And so you'll find consulting companies that have an office in Australia and in Brussels and in Paris and in Ottawa, and they're working at a global level. And again, this creates new opportunities for those of you who may have been restricted in the past due to citizenship. Maybe you can get in through one of these global companies and use it as a vehicle to work elsewhere in the world. And then the last issue is proliferation. I mentioned this because I see one mistake made by a lot of candidates looking for their first job in this field, is that they know a few well-known organizations. They've heard of the World Bank and they've heard of the Gates Foundation and Save the Children, and so they apply to those institutions. But there are many, many more. And if there's anything that's marked the last 10 years of global aid and development, it's a proliferation of new entities, new funding vehicles, vertical funds, new aid agencies, new foundations and NGOs, new social enterprises. It's absolutely proliferating. So if you want to really look for all the opportunities that are out there, you have to do much more research than you might have done a decade ago. But it creates new prospects and opportunities for those of you who are willing to dig into those new potential opportunities. There was a little bit of a few questions that were asked during this period, and I just want to try to address a couple of them. Somebody was asking about public-private partnerships and how to work with or through the private sector. There's a lot of activity in this area. The private sector is getting very engaged. Some of it is what we might call CSR, corporate social responsibility, where companies have a unit that is trying to focus on their originally philanthropic activities and now more sustainability issues for their business. And some of it, in terms of public-private partnerships, are these